Well, Africa is the world's youngest and fastest growing population, a continent of huge potential.
The narrative about Africa was off. And our job is to fix that narrative because no continent has ever had it perfect.
Silverback Holdings specializes in targeting high growth companies in the region, in sports, in tech, in entertainment, in media and fashion. And I'm joined by the executive chairman, Ibrahim Sagna. Welcome, Ibrahim. Now, before this FFI conference, there was a conference about Africa as well, the day one in fact. What are you seeing in terms of recognition now of the 50 plus countries on the continent and the potential that they have and where you fit into it?
To get a market such as Saudi Arabia, bring the best event on earth at the moment and have the first day dedicated to the continent, proves that the future is African. We all know the numbers. 1 out of 4 individuals on earth by 2050 will be African. Workforce, 1.2, 1.3 billion, coming very fast. And as you can see on the scope of culture, on the scope of music, on the scope of sports, you cannot miss us.
Are you going to tell me I'm too skeptical, but I feel I've heard about the potential of Africa for the last 10, 15, 20 years. Everyone's saying it's almost Africa's moment. Why do you think that is the case now?
Well, I think each time it has gone well for those that have spent the time to focus, collect, reap, and get up again. I'm one of those that spent 30 years of their career strictly financing the continent, north of $30 billion as a banker, and focusing on what you call the traditional industries. That's natural resource, infrastructure, but what rarely gets attended to is consumer. Because when you fund consumer space, you don't have bridges and roads and infrastructure you can build with a foreign company. Because there's a double way to gain when you invest on the continent those ways. Consumer, it's the local economy that has to do a lot. In this chapter, the benefit is that technology allows an absolute destruction of frontiers. It allows an African out of a random village to become an athlete star globally, to become a music star globally. As we all know, there's a song called Calm Down that became #1 in India and in many parts of the world that many of us have danced to.
How much do you think that Africa is now becoming a more homogeneous area when it comes to connectivity? In the kind of areas where you are developing your business, are you now overcoming that? In other words, national boundaries and borders don't mean as much anymore.
The one thing to realize is in the segment of consumption of African culture, which is the essential business we're in, whether it is a musician, an artist, an athlete, or someone that develops a technology, he does not need to sell necessarily to an African. Africa, you are right, tend to be sold as this 1.3 billion population play. But the reality is on a $10 per day, it's only 50 million people that fit that bill. However, globally, there's actually 160 million Africans that reside in the UK, US, and other parts. That does not include African Americans. If you include African Americans and Caribbeans, you run into 300 million. But the 160 million alone ship back home on remittances $100 billion a year. That's $637 per year per person. And that's not your sole market. It's now everybody. That African, even if there's some infrastructure gap, can produce something that can get consumed by someone that's absolutely not African and make money on an FX basis. And that's precisely the opportunity.
How do you, though, in your company, Silverbacks, how do you connect up these countries at a time when still many of the countries are still wanting to be very nationalistic? What you're talking about, your sectors are incredibly multinational, enormous excitement. for all generations. How do you make that leap from the constraints to the possibilities?
I think what we have to realize that in sectors such as technology, the creative industry at large, it's rarely the government that takes the lead. It's the private sector, it's the entrepreneur that finds an institution like us to lend a hand, lend some capital, put some government in place, and plug you into international markets. Because the international market wants the finished product. This year we had the largest transaction ever occur on the music label front, where Universal Music Group purchased control of a Nigerian-based company called Maven Records. And the numbers that are floated are north of $150 million. And there was no government involved. There was no road issues. There was no electricity issues. There was a deal. So we need to understand that money finds opportunity and does not require a government as a referee.
Are you saying governments are backing off, getting involved with people like you?
Negative. I'm saying don't wait for the government to lift your hand for you to start walking. But you need the government to help you walk faster. So our governments need to do their role in understanding that sports can play a role to improve their position in terms of soft power. We are here in the kingdom. What do we know about the kingdom? Is that it has amazing infrastructure for sports. It has retained and is purchasing the best players in the world, but it was not done in one day. They started by investing in sports inside the country, but outside the country.
What about those who don't have that opportunity in Africa, who are really skilled, got real initiative, but looking for opportunity? How does your work at Silverbacks facilitate that, to encourage them through media, through sport and so on?
So as a firm, Silverbacks has been created 5 years ago to do three things. Provide capital to promising entrepreneurs that typically have already set up other businesses, success or failures, but we believe learning came out of it. So our portfolio, 75% of our allocation is pretty much around a dozen of companies who typically have been backed before by other VCs. And we're just coming in and we treat ourselves almost as an Ivy League or a university, but they typically must have gone through a high school. And those candidates, we take them to the world because we invest in media properties. We have a podcast, we have a partnership with Forbes, we have some investment in media properties where their stories gets amplified. Because I believe that irrespective of the time we were in, the narrative about Africa was off. And our job is to fix that narrative because no continent has ever had it perfect. But continents present themselves perfect. So our job is to make sure that each of those founders gets the right representation because they are chasing capital markets. And capital markets rewards good governance, good story, good narrative. And that's what we're going to systematically going to continue to do.
Where do you think we will be, or Africa will be in, say, 2 or 3 years' time? Because the world is moving incredibly fast on so many fronts, particularly technologically. When you look at South Africa, where you have a home, you know, when you look at ESCOM, the power problems and all the political problems, it's never easy in Africa, maybe apart from Rwanda, but they went through a difficult time 20 years ago.
No, I think problems are never going to stop, but great stories are often not told. So in our portfolio, we have a company called Move. It was started by 2 Nigerians that used to handle the billboard business of JC Deschaux, the French one. And they got an exclusive to do some work for Uber, where they were leasing cars to Uber. That business, we invested when it had $7 million of revenue to Uber. And then 4 years later today, notwithstanding of being in Nigeria, they're in Ghana, South Africa, Kenya, Dubai, UK, India, the US, Latin America, and $175 million. We believe that The story of Africa should not be one that contains and restricts itself to the country where you
But the main point I'm trying to get to very quickly is, are you speeding up the process?
We are speeding up the process. Those are the stories, those are the companies we're helping because we believe that the change comes from those companies.
Ibrahim Sagna, Executive Chairman of Silverback Holdings, thank you very much indeed for joining us.